the uncomfortable truths about finance, power, and opportunity. If you've ever felt like the rules of money weren't really designed for you, this conversation is going to change the way you think about financial fluency and inclusive capitalism. My guest today is Blair Smith. Blair Smith is a visionary leader in finance, economic equality, currently serving as a senior director at the Milken Institute Center for Financial Markets.
Growing up broke probably shaped a lot of my thinking, informed a lot of my decision making around finance, and spending the weekends in Baltimore watching people that looked and sounded like me struggle. You never be afraid to tell the truth. They used to call the model minority the noble savage. Now you're the model minority. But before, they used to love calling people like us and people that were of indigenous backgrounds the noble savage. Self-trust is the part that financial literacy leads at, because you have to trust yourself to know when you decide to make a decision. For example, for whatever reason, people think that they have self-trust in crypto and Bitcoin, and they'll look at it and they'll say, oh, I know what I'm doing. But do you really? It's really about people really understanding and being comfortable with making their decisions. A lot of people are not comfortable, particularly people that look and sound like us, with making a financial decision. Just because you understand and know finance, that makes you an evil person, it does not. If I told you that you were financially illiterate, what would you say? If somebody said to me or my kids, well, they're not financially literate, they need to be financially fluent, I'd say, yeah, they need to be financially fluent. You're absolutely right. Don't call me and my kids illiterate. What are you doing? Why my kid? Why are they illiterate? Going back to something Dr. King said that reminds me of all this. He said it's an insult to tell the man that has no boots that you need to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps.
And there's a statement actually that said that intelligence is distributed equally. Opportunity is not.
What I think about is, imagine telling 30 million people that they didn't know what they were doing. And there are 30 million people of color in this country. And this society is constantly telling you what you can do, cannot do. You begin to believe it eventually, or your children eventually believe it. I grew up in the Baltimore area, and there are 15,000 homes in Baltimore that are being repossessed either by taxes, that were owned by people of color, that worked very hard to get those homes, and now they're being bought up by the city. And the city doesn't even want them. And if you look back at the history of home ownership in this country, of redlining, and you look at cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh and Atlanta and Philadelphia, you'll see that black home ownership existed. Then all of a sudden it stopped. What stopped it? What happened to it? When I sold my dad's house, and I was the executor of his will a few years ago, the buyer did not want to buy the house unless I collected all the pictures of the black couple, and then they felt more comfortable buying the home. And having a parcel of land that you yourself own, that you have the deed to, is really what the American dream is about. And if you're a person of color and you have a piece of the pie, you have a piece of equity, and that's where the equity and inclusion part comes in, that people gloss over.
What if I told you that your financial future isn't just about how much you save or invest, but about the systems who determine who gets access to the capital and who doesn't? What if I told you that wealth creation isn't just personal, it's deeply systemic? Welcome to Confluently. Today, we're uncovering the uncomfortable truths about finance, power, and opportunity. If you've ever felt like the rules of money weren't designed for you, this conversation is going to change the way you think about financial fluency and inclusive capitalism. My guest today is Blair Smith. Blair is a visionary leader in finance, economic equity, and he's currently serving as a senior director at Milken Institute Center for Financial Markets. His mission? To break down barriers in accessing capital, diversify asset management, and drive impact investment and transformation for communities. With over 20 years of experience, Blair has worked at the intersection of finance and social impact. He's previously leading investment strategies that empower small businesses, revitalize communities, and challenge systemic inequalities in wealth creation. He has shaped multi-billion-dollar investment portfolios, championed emerging fund managers, and advised key financial institutions on making equity more than just a buzzword, but a business imperative. Beyond finance, Blair is an educator, a change maker, serving as an adjunct professor at Columbia schools and sitting on the boards of organizations that are dedicated to health equity, media representation, and community driven empowerment. And trust me, you won't want to miss what he has to say. Today, we're deep diving into systemic barriers in finance, the data behind inequity, as well as the financial fluency. It isn't just about wealth, it's also about self-trust. Because understanding money isn't just about getting ahead. It's about rewriting the rules of who gets to build wealth and who gets left behind. With that, I would like to welcome Blair. Blair, welcome to the show.
Wherever you described, I want to meet that guy because he sounds pretty cool.
You are pretty cool.
He hadn't been talking about me.
Absolutely, I'm talking about you.
No way.
Absolutely.
But I appreciate the opportunity to talk today about some of the issues that I care about.
I love that. I love that. So let me go ahead and just kind of start off with the first question. What really shaped your passion for equity in finance and economic empowerment?
I would say that growing up broke probably shaped a lot of my being informed a lot of my decision making around finance and spending the weekends in Baltimore watching people that looked and sounded like me struggle. That informed a lot of the thinking around me. And a lot of the thinking around me was growing up in a family of journalists. And those journalists teaching me that you never be afraid to tell the truth or never be afraid of the truth, whatever it is, even if it makes you uncomfortable.
That's what we're here at Confluently to go ahead and do, is to go ahead and face those uncomfortable truths and to go ahead and expose the light as what is it? Is it the New York Times or is it the Wall Street Journal that says democracy dies in the darkness?
It does.
That's why we're here.
I think if you look back at their history and our history, it equates now to what's going on now. And we look back because everything that we're experiencing is not new.
No,
It's happened before.
absolutely.
And a lot of the history that they teach us in this country in particular, it omits a lot of the empowerment that a lot of people that look and sound like us should have.
You once said that financial fluency is an understanding of savings, investing, debt, and
That's correct.
And institutions that lead to a clear sense of financial well-being, wealth creation, and most importantly, self-trust. Can you unpack what self-trust means in this context?
Self-trust is the part that financial literacy leaves out because you have to trust yourself to know when you decide to make a decision, and particularly around investing, that you trust yourself and that you've researched it and you know what you're doing. For example, for whatever reason, people think that they have self-trust in crypto and Bitcoin, and they'll look at it and they'll say, oh, I know what I'm doing. But do you really? That's the question. Have you researched it? Do you know? And then when you lose money on it, when it goes down, when it's 30,000, then it goes down to 10,000, then it goes up to 100,000. Do you know what you're doing? Do you know what that means? And I think that self-trust, going back to what you were saying, is really about people really understanding and being comfortable with making their decisions.
Young Americans, right? 18 to 34. I wouldn't consider 34 quite young, but it still may be. And disproportionately that for Blacks and Hispanic populations, that their financial literacy rates are at the lowest.
Yes.
And I think
which is very sad.
Yeah, that's a shame, right? And so we're failing our future, correct?
Yes, we are. We don't put enough emphasis on understanding it. And I think that's a big problem because to go forward in a capitalist society, which this is, you have to have some understanding of how finance works. And you have to be comfortable with that. And that's where financial fluency comes in. Financial literacy is very important. I won't say it's not important. It is. But there's also a stigma attached to that too. If I told you that you were financially illiterate, what would you say?
Where am
If
I
I told you that you
Where
need
am I
to be
literate and what can I
financially
learn?
Exactly. But if I said, well, you're financially literate, but you need to be more financially fluent, how would you feel? I should have asked you out and telling you that you're financially illiterate makes you feel.
I think that I think that I understand the difference between literacy and fluency.
Yes. And I think a lot of young people, when you tell them that they're financially illiterate, they get upset. And I understand that because if somebody said to me or my kids, well, they're not financially literate, they need to be financially fluent, I say, yeah, they need to be financially fluent. You're absolutely right. Don't call me and my kids illiterate. What are you doing? Why my kid? Why are they illiterate?
I think you're right. I think that the terminology that we use around this is really significant in how we tackle this going forward, right? Illiterate has a connotation, especially for communities of colored people, right? And what that means
Exactly.
for us. But when you say fluency, I think that there's a large portion of us that say we're not fluent in Spanish. We may be able to read a little bit and get by, at our local bodega or with our friend group, but we're not fluent enough to have a conversation. That's a different story. And that we can go ahead and understand, accept, and say, you know what, how can we get better?
Going back to something Dr. King said that reminds me of all this. He said it's an insult to tell the man that has no boots that you need to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. It's an insult to tell somebody that's never been exposed to finance that you're financially illiterate. They don't realize that's an insult.
My grandfather dropped out, I think, in ninth grade to go ahead and, quite quickly after that, joined the war, World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And, you look at them, and I would never say that they were financially literate. They ran their own businesses, they did extraordinarily well. And if you asked them to calculate out tax on anything or a tip, they could do it in their mind in 2.5 seconds. But I think that some of these skills have been lost over time.
Yes.
And why do they end up in that same cycle, right? Of welfare and what we call unskilled labor. Now, I don't call it that. I call it low paid labor, not unskilled. Because if you've ever seen somebody like pick any type of vegetable or work any
Mm-hmm.
type of job, such as a waitress, that is not a low skill circumstance. That is a high skill circumstance that's lowly paid. And really just kind of rolling that into, I think, my next question, which is, income inequality continues to be a widening issue in the United States, particularly along racial and ethnic and gender lines. The chart that you had sent me previously, in particular, shows the income disparities between the ethnicities in the United States. And, me as being a Black woman, there are some obvious and glaring numbers that speak painfully loud to me. But when you look at this, what really kind of leaps out to you?
Well, what I think about is imagine telling 30 million people that they didn't know what they were doing. That's what I think about it. And there are 30 million people of color in this country. And if you constantly tell them through media and society and that you don't know what you're doing, your ancestors, they believed what they could do, not they didn't believe what they couldn't. That's the difference. That separated them. They focused on what they could do. And I think that a lot of people are taught what they can do, cannot do. That's the difference. And you eventually believe that. It begins to sink in. And I'm speaking very anecdotally. I'm not throwing out a lot of facts here or stats because I could. There are stats and facts to back up what I'm saying, but I'm going to speak anecdotally for a second. When a society is constantly telling you what you can do, cannot do, you begin to believe it eventually, or your children eventually believe it. And I think that's what happens here, unfortunately. People of color are constantly told what they cannot do versus what they can do. That's the difference. In other countries, the reason that people feel so comfortable in Europe or Africa is because they're not being told what they cannot do. They're being told what they can do. In this country, you're told what you can do, cannot do. And
Absolutely.
that's the difference, I
Absolutely.
think.
I studied the social determinants of economics. That was my thesis in my undergrad, which was very not popular, by the way, at the time
I can imagine.
with my economics professor. You're
Mhm.
like, this is not very Keynesian of you, and I was like, well, it is,
Right.
but it's just
Mhm.
it's not talking about the one top 1 or 10%. One of my thesis in that, or one of my questions around this was, if you're left outside of societal norms,
Mhm.
that you will still find a way, that when you are left outside of the current economic status, you will create your own economic status. And this is really regardless of race. So we've seen this. Women are locked out. They go ahead and go to the black market to go ahead and continue. That's why
Mhm.
prostitution is considered one of the oldest professions in the book. So when you're locked out of mainstream or societally accepted methods of economics, you will find a way. And the best way to avoid those unwanted, unintended consequences is to fold them in. And one of the best ways to fold them in is to have a way forward, right? And so when you're
Mhm.
talking about your mom sitting there as the first, secretary, right? And a person of color, I'm sure, sitting in her position,
Mhm.
who did she have as her mentor? Someone that she looked up to, someone that she could say, you know what, I want to be like her and I'm going to do that like her. Did she have someone?
Fortunately, I think that was the difference also is mentorship. You have to have mentorship. You have to, if you don't have it, you have to seek it out. Because she had the mayor and his family, and that really made the difference, I think, for her in shaping how she thought about the world. Because she looked to them and she said, well, if they can do it, then I'll try to do it too, or I'll have my kid do it.
I mean, I think that's really fantastic. I think that, as I look at my children, right? My daughter, she wants to be a ballerina, and or at the current moment, let's put it that way.
Mhm.
Um, I can look to a history of,
Mhm.
black ballerinas, right?
Mhm.
That when I was growing up did not exist. And I tell her, I said, it wasn't too long ago that there were people for me to look up to that looked like me.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think that makes all the difference in the world for aspiration, right?
Mhm.
To be able to say, what, someone else has done it before, so why can't I? Right. But I think that both you and I live in a very different world. Okay. We've seen both sides of that glass, from our children's side and also our parents' side, and where we're at. And we can understand that there are some very strong barriers to entry. Aspiration is not enough, right? And that
I
it
agree.
comes with a downside of being criticized. I don't think that Serena Williams would say that at any point this has been easy, right? For people who look at us and they say, well, you know, it's just about working harder, working better for financial choices. Do you think that's indeed the case?
I mean, you always have to work harder and be better, but I think that that being the only thing that differentiates you is not true. Because in this society, particularly these young people, there are a lot of folks who have been there before them that have done what they've done. And so you just have to do your research about history. But I think that, for example, with Serena Williams, there's Althea Gibson before her.
Yep.
And a lot of people don't even know who Althea Gibson is, but they know Serena Williams is, which is good.
Yep.
That's a good thing. But Althea Gibson didn't have anybody before her, and a lot of people told her that she couldn't do what she wanted to do because she was too black or too tall or she didn't look or fit the mold. That and they told Serena the same thing.
Absolutely.
And your daughter is interested in being a ballerina. She's very fortunate that she has folks like Missy Copeland and others who look and sound like her that she can look to and say, "Oh, I can be like them." And Missy and a lot of her peers didn't have anybody like that. They were constantly told that, oh, you don't fit the mold and you don't look like what we're looking for. And that goes into creating your own. That's why we have Alvin Ailey and we have Old Dan Theater of Harlem because we felt the need to create our own versus relying on others and waiting for others to let us in. And I think that's the difference.
Absolutely. Thinking about modern culture, right? There's Watchmen. And I think that was the
Mhm.
first time that a lot of audience really understood what Black Wall Street was. More importantly, what happened to it. So when we talk about the access to capital, business loans, investments, and even deeper,
Mhm.
I really would like to know about what you've been working on with your new initiative, really around minority home ownership through centers of economic power, and why this is such a critical issue right now, and what steps need to be taken to close that home ownership gap.
Well, first, let me say that you're speaking my language when you're talking about comic, because I know the Watchmen story very well. And I think that was the first time ever in a medium like movies that they've depicted Black Wall Street and what happened to it. And incidentally, that was the first time the airplane was ever used domestically. And it proved the case for war. They used it on us
Yes,
to prove the case
domestically.
that domestic warfare with airplanes works. And that's, unfortunately, that's why we use the power of air in a lot of our domestic battles, because we proved it with the use of the airplane on Black Wall Street by bombing those unfortunate people, which was a terrible thing. But the programs that we have now, which I've been working on, and particularly affordable housing, is informed by the fact that I grew up in the Baltimore area, and there are 15,000 homes in Baltimore that are being repossessed either by taxes, that were owned by people of color that worked very hard to get those homes, and now they're being bought up by the city, and the city doesn't even want them. But they've all gone to decay. What happened to them? What's going to happen to them? They're all very nice homes. And if you look back at the history of home ownership in this country, of redlining, and you look at cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh and Atlanta and Philadelphia, you'll see that Black home ownership existed. Then all of a sudden it stopped. What stopped it? What happened to it? What were the catalysts that created issues for Blacks who want to abandon it? Well, there are a number of them. One of them was redlining. The other was urban development. I'm going to build a highway in the middle of a Black neighborhood. That prevents anybody. That would prevent any group of people from
Yeah.
wanting to do anything. If you knew highways are going to be built right in the middle of your neighborhood that you own your house for, you could sell your house. And if you knew that, oh, well, we're not going to enforce the law in your neighborhood, we're going to enforce the law in other people's neighborhoods. We're not going to pick up the trash in your neighborhood. We're going to pick it up in other people's neighborhood. That's going to inform you whether you own a home there or not either.
Absolutely. Just thinking about that again, the social determinants, right, of economics. When you have a highway that goes through your neighborhood, it creates what's called a bypass. So people no longer drive through your downtown. They don't visit your stores. They don't go ahead and support or water that what was once a growing community. And you now end
Mhm.
up with what we call food deserts, medical deserts, and all of these other type of social atmospheres, and that once contributed to the economic growth of a community, parks, community, medical, community farmers markets. When you put a highway through that, you just bypass it. That's just now another exit on the freeway that you
Mhm.
may or may not visit. It makes it a very different socioeconomical community than it once was.
Exactly. Or a train. If you decide, well, I'm going to run my train through your neighborhood, that informs a lot of ownership also. And whether or not you, as a Black owner, are going to be an owner or a tenant, or do I want to own a home where the train is running right next to my window? No, of course not. Do I want to own a home where a car is running through right past my neighborhood or right past my window? No, of course not. Who would want that? Nobody would in their right mind.
I can't agree with you more. And, I pulled some information off of the U.S. Census Bureau around this concept of home ownership and what this really means in the long term. So, white home ownership is around, 74.6%, right? Whereas Black home ownership is at 44.9%, which is a
Mm-hmm.
29.7% gap from white households.
Mm-hmm.
Hispanic ownership is 49.7. And on this particular metrics that I had, I didn't have, Southeast Asians or Asians
Mm-hmm.
ownership numbers, but they were, generally higher than the three that we generally track, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that was really kind of striking to me, which I'm hoping you can go ahead and speak on, is that black white ownership gap is actually larger now than it was in the 1960s before the Fair Housing Act was passed. And can you go ahead and talk about why that is and what systems or institutions have been placed in the way of that?
Well, I will speak about it anecdotally. The first is access, because you have to look at those neighborhoods and look at, do blacks have access to the opportunity? The other are lending practices. A lot of lending practices are inherently biased towards people that look and sound like us.
Yep.
The other issue is that bias carries over to, well, if I let them come into this neighborhood, you have to look at history. And I think, let me not jump around the subject. I'll go back to the history of redlining and how redlining ended. Redlining ended because there were a number of banks and brokers that said, well, you know what, I'm going to let this black doctor or this black lawyer buy this house in this white neighborhood. And then the whites in that neighborhood, they all decide to move out of it. Okay, so then it becomes an affluent black neighborhood, like Baldwin Hills or others that are out there, or Shaker Heights in the Midwest.
Yep.
So then you look at those neighborhoods and you say, okay, those neighborhoods are nice, but then we're going to take away some of the privileges that those neighborhoods enjoy, like police protection or trash pickup and all sorts of other things that would invite, and we're going to lower our standards for who we let in. We're going to say, you know what? We're going to let folks in that aren't taught about caring for their home. And I think that's the difference is you have to educate homeowners. You have to tell them, you know what? You're not a tenant anymore. You're a homeowner. So as a homeowner, you have to take care of this very differently. It's yours. You own it. And I think that's the difference
Absolutely.
within the homeowner.
Absolutely. I think that, it has been noted again by the National Association for Realtors, right, that Black homeowners face higher mortgage denial rates, as well as they're more likely to be steered into high cost loans compared to white households. There was a great case study on this around a person who was getting an appraisal for their house and they left their artwork and family photos on the wall versus when they stripped it down and had the appraiser come in with a white friend who was basically house sat for them and appraised the home. And it was over $200,000 difference in the appraisal of the home, although nothing about the structure had changed, other than the person that greeted them at the door was white and there was no definitive black features that were, featured throughout the house.
I had a very personal experience around that. My when I sold my dad's house, and I was the executor of his will a few years ago, the buyer did not want to buy the house with pictures of him and his ex-wife, God rest her soul, with them looking back then. And the realtor told me this, and the realtor was like, I'll tell you this on condition of anonymity, but I want to share it on this podcast, that person, they wouldn't buy the home unless I collected all the pictures of the black couple, and then they felt more comfortable buying the home. And the realtor told me, they said, well, that's a very old practice.
It's still a practice that is commonly espoused today, although in most circumstances, it's guised as they don't want anything that personalizes the home. And that's how they phrase it. It needs to be very neutral so that people can imprint what they want. And I think that that's really kind of an unfortunate thing, because I think that houses that have charm, history, memories, happiness, sadness, and joys shared along with it makes it even that more precious, because that's what we're buying, right? Not just a structure.
When that occurred a couple of years ago, I was astonished because I couldn't imagine when I decided to buy a home If there were pictures of a white couple up, I wouldn't demand that they be removed so I could buy the home. That's insane. I mean, why would you do that? Why would you need to do that? Can you imagine? Or an Asian couple or any couple?
Be like, this is too white for me.
Yeah, you got to take those white people down. Take those pictures down. I don't want them staring back at me while I'm looking at the home. That's insane. But leave the furniture. Leave the artwork.
I see ghost.
Right. But take the pictures of them down. I don't want to see those black faces looking down at me.
But it's acceptable for somebody to say it to us. Orange. I never met the homeowners, and I was fortunate for that. But I have actually been rejected from purchasing a home. Once they looked at my profile, they said no.
Got a good look at you, yeah.
Or being a single mom. I've gotten rejected from renting before. And, both California and New York and stuff like that. Regardless of my income, I felt that discrepancy 100 times over. One of the articles that you actually sent me was from Milken Institute for Black Economic Mobility around investing in housing and unlocking economic mobility for Black family. It really highlights that nearly 60% are Black renters and 30% of Black homeowners are really cost burdened, right? Paying more than they can actually afford for housing. Can you break down why this is, why it's happening, and how it impacts the long-term economic mobility?
Okay. So I think anecdotally again, you go back to the profile of who looks like they can afford a house versus who they're selling a house to. And then they add color to that. And it skews the data, I think.
One of the other questions I really have is why home ownership, right? In particular, this particular asset group, and how it really affects generational wealth and the ability to create financial security for and within the Black, brown, and POC communities.
That goes back all the way to the 1860s when you had parcels of land be given out to white folks. The Black folks were not given that opportunity to have those parcels of land. And having a parcel of land that you yourself own, that you have the deed to, is really what the American dream is about. Equity, having a piece of ownership in the country. That's the differentiator between a renter and a homeowner. And if you're a person of color and you have a piece of the pie, you have a piece of equity. And that's where the equity and inclusion part comes in that the people gloss over. They don't think about that part. The equity, if I buy a house versus being a renter, then I have a piece of ownership. It's like financial fluency. When you buy stock, you have a piece of ownership in that company. So if I were a big stock owner in Disney, then I would own a piece of Disney. I'd be able to shape what Disney did. If you're a homeowner, then you can shape what happens in that neighborhood. You can raise your hand and say, hey, wait a minute. I don't like the fact that it's happening here. I'm going to go to my city council and complain. I'm going to go to the mayor and complain because I own a house here and I pay taxes here.
It is empowering, right?
Yes, it's very empowering.
And I think that, I've become one of those people, don't stand on my grass type people.
Right. Don't stand on my lawn.
Yeah, don't stand on my lawn. Exactly.
Yeah.
When it is that the schools aren't performing, I'm paying for that. And so I can actually see that coming out of my home taxes. And I care more about what that looks like because I know inversely, the better the schools are, the better the return on my property, right? And that means the higher equity that I get and the return on my investment in my home. When my neighbor isn't picking up on their lawn, I'm going to walk over and say, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? Are you having some issues? Do you need help? But more importantly, we need to figure out what's going on here. And that's a lot different than if you're a renter because the only thing you really care about is your landlord and whether your toilet's flushing. You're not caring about that. Your rent money is really going towards the schools, the neighborhood, the police station, the fire department, the ambulances, and all of those community efforts. I know that this is really such a critical issue right now. What steps can we take to really close this home ownership gap that we just talked about? that is so wide between whites, blacks, Hispanics, and so forth?
It's hard because you have to change the process. And the process currently is to borrow money from a big bank. And I don't want to bash any big banks, but borrowing money from a bank currently is, I think, what prevents a lot of people from home ownership. I think the process, because a lot of young people, and I don't have patience for the process. When I bought a house, you had the closing, and it was a brutal process. These days, when your attention span is only 8 seconds, your attention span has been reduced significantly for young people. You don't have time to wait for that. Versus if I say, well, sign a piece of paper and you can live in this apartment or house and you can rent it and just give me money. I think the process is differentiated. That's what separates homeowners from home renters because it's easier to rent than it is to own. And when they change the process, that's when things will change, I think.
I think you brought up a really key issue, one that I didn't disclose prior to this conversation that we're having now. But I think that process is a systemic barrier towards home ownership, but a lot of things that require, I think, large capital buy-in through investing, or it's through anything else like that. Even, something simple as, proving, getting your star on your ID, right? That requires you going down to the DMV, bringing your birth certificates, 2 pieces of mail, and standing in line for 2 hours. That's a lot. That's a lot of work, as you said, especially for the younger generation. That has been, for lack of a better term,
A lot of younger people, it's easier to take an Uber than to get a driver's license.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've created a system like that goes ahead and makes the barrier even higher. One of the things that, I've been exploring with a couple of my friends is the blockchain, right? Putting this on the blockchain through a DAO.
If I could buy a house with blockchain and crypto, then I would do it tomorrow. I agree. Yes, I think that we need to address the issue of process and how young people become homeowners. I think that needs to be addressed immediately. And I think I want to challenge all the folks out there who are in the forefront of issues like the Susu guys and the John O'Briens of the world. Examine the process. And my friend Mark Morial at National Urban League, examine the process. And that will inform young people how they can have a piece of the American pie and a piece of the American dream and be homeowners versus home renters.
I absolutely agree with you. And, these are really bold solutions to address a housing crisis. We need to, including unlocking land, leveraging private capital, and reinvesting in public housing. I think that when you're talking...
So I'm 2 years away from 60, so any proposal I make, they'll just say he's a crazy old man. What does he know?
I don't think that you're crazy at all. And I think that you're absolutely right. I think there's also a part of people that are older, and I include myself in that says, I did it. You should do it too. But ultimately, I think the solutions are going to be around us relinquishing that, we went through all that pain and that struggle to get to where we're at, and saying, no, it should be easier. You shouldn't have to put in 2 pounds of flesh and, a kidney to go ahead and be a homeowner or to be a part of the larger society. And I think those that will remove those barriers are going to be really driving the future of the capital markets that we see in the world.
I pray that when your children are older, that the process for home ownership is much easier than it is now.
I hope so too. I really, really do. Now, we've talked about a lot of different things. If we could prioritize just one initiative right now, what would you have be the biggest impact?
I think the biggest impact today would be home ownership. I think every young person within the sound of my voice, if they save their money and become a homeowner versus a renter, that would be impactful. Because from being a homeowner, you have equity in the neighborhood, then you can influence the government, then you can influence local politics, then you can influence the everything else that's going on. But you have to be an owner first. You have to have a piece of equity. Then you can influence education and all the other stuff that comes with it.
Absolutely. Again, throwing out something that wasn't in the briefing, fractionated home ownership. Have you heard of this?
Mm-hmm.
Which allows for you to be an owner for a leased period of time. So similar to leasing a car or something else along those things, but allows you to get some equity, but equity share with the person who put the capital up. Do you think that that would still have the same benefit?
It would be a pathway.
You try it before you buy it, right?
Yes. I think that it would be a pathway and it would lead to, it would be a gateway to home ownership on a more permanent level and a pathway to the American dream.
Switching to a little bit more of a serious situation that's kind of impacting all of these conversations that we're having today is really around considering the current anti-DEI landscape that continues to see companies as well as investments pull back from communities, especially diverse communities. How should we reconcile this disconnect and what can we do to overcome it?
All I'll say is that you can change the names, but that doesn't get rid of the issues. The issues are always going to be there. The issues were there 20 years ago. The issues were there 2 years ago. The issues will be there tomorrow. Hopefully not tomorrow. But if you keep trying to change the name or the brand, or I'm going to get rid of all my DEI initiatives, they're all going to be back. You'll have to bring them back because the issues are not going to go away. Changing the name of something does not change the issue. Getting rid of a department does not get rid of the issue. Getting rid of a line item that, oh, I'm going to put funding aside for DEI, then I'm going to get rid of it. That doesn't get rid of the issue. The issue is still there. Inequity towards women, this fear of women, this bias towards women. Well, if she's a woman, that she's not going to be able to do this or she's not going to be able to do that. That's why they had to make a 19th Amendment and they had to create Title IX. They shouldn't have had to do any of those things, but they did because the fear of women is what motivated a lot of it.
And what really inspired me, so, going back to your mother and everything else like that, was RBG, right?
Mm-hmm.
She said, I don't need a hand up, right? I just need to
Right.
stop stepping on my neck.
Exactly. Don't create biases towards me. Don't be afraid of me. Don't treat me like you treat everybody else. That's all people really want. That's the definition of inclusion.
Absolutely. But I think that we have been, as a society, tackling this problem for the last, 100 years, right? Since the 1920s, when women got the right to
At
vote,
least.
and then going
Yes.
on through 1974, women could put their name on businesses and then
Mhm.
credit cards and have their own bank accounts, and Black people got the right to vote, as well as, income, inequality for payment of services and work, and even just spousal abuse only, I think, got ratified in 2018 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So we've been working at this for 100 years. And yet we're still ended up in the same situation. Do you think it's time to take a sledgehammer to it?
What would the sledgehammer do? So the short answer to that is yes, I think so. And I'll look back at something that my maternal grandfather used to say, who fought for this country and back in World War II. And he used to say, well, Blair, for you, there's the 13th Amendment, and for women, for people like your mother and my daughter and others, my wife, there's a 19th Amendment. So everything in this country that protects your rights, it took 5 amendments to protect the rights of people that look and sound like your mother. And I think about that a lot. It shouldn't take five. Getting an amendment in this country is really hard to do. So the fact that it went from 14 amendments or 13 amendments to 19 to give me my rights when they had the 13th Amendment, and they give you your rights when they had the 19th Amendment. That's a huge leap in both time and effort.
I think I agree. I think that if you were to ask me this question 4 years ago or 6 years ago, even, I probably would say no. I would say work within the institutions to go ahead and create cultural change over a given period of time.
I like the sledgehammer metaphor. I think
But-
that you may need to take a sledgehammer to change things.
Yeah. What is it? Because it is that people have forgotten history.
Yes. We forget that the ERA was killed by a woman and that Nixon was going to sign it. But women came to him, led by a woman named Phil Suckley, and this isn't something that is hidden. You can look it up.
I know.
But she said, oh, we don't need the Equal Rights Amendment, so he didn't sign it.
Yes, she regretted that many years later, didn't she?
She did. And I think that a lot of women will regret when they see their daughter struggling, what's happening, and they'll wish that somebody had taken a sledgehammer and thrown it up against the wall or the institution that hold them back.
I think that at this particular time and space, I think it's going to require that. I think we're
I
not.
don't want
I don't think.
anything to hold my daughter back. And if it takes a throwing a sledgehammer at the institutions, then that's what needs to happen.
I think that if people actually read Martin Luther King a little bit closer, as this is Black History Month, they would find out that he's actually not that far off from Malcolm X in
That's
his
right.
beliefs and what he said. If they actually read the letters from the Birmingham jail in the proper way, they would find out that they did not disagree necessarily on what needed to change and potentially how it needed to change. Just some were a little bit more quicker to arms than others. But at no point did they necessarily say that change would come without sacrifice.
A lot of what Dr. King believed, a lot of people don't discuss. They just take excerpts of the stuff that he believed that was peaceful
Yes.
and passive. That's what they focus on. But a lot of people don't focus on the fact that before he died, he was the most hated man in this country.
You've hit a actual personal and very recent nail on the head for me, which is something that I had to learn very much the hard way, which is not all skin folk are kinfolk.
That's
And
right.
that hurt me, I think, a lot, right? But I also think that it has been inbred in us, right? Through experience that, it took us everything we had to do to get to where we're at. And to spend that capital on others that look like us, it means that we are the token, we are the exception, not the equal in the room. And we've come to expect that. And if we go ahead and invite others into the room, in which becomes the tipping point, which is usually around 30%, as we know, right? If there's 30% of people of color in the room, then it changes the dynamics of a boardroom, of leadership, of executives, and how they engage with each other, that we will no longer be the only one. We will no longer be the token. And so I think that I challenge us to no longer become the token, to no longer be proud of being the exception, but that we can go ahead and grow into being equals.
Women represent 50% at least of the population. So why wouldn't you have a woman in the boardroom? That's my question. Why would you have all men in the boardroom? Why would you only have 50% population representation in the boardroom? That's my thought on it.
Well, I had one executive tell me, he was like, if women were meant to be in the boardroom, there'd be more of them. But there's not. Why is that? It's because they're not meant to be. And I said, sir,
That's because they're being locked out.
I said, because you won't let them in.
Let's say it's software, or I am in a board for Amazon or Dunkin' Donuts, or I don't want to call anybody out, but let's say it's a product that I know that women are going to use at some point. Why would I not have a woman decision maker at the board level? Why would they be excluded? Why would I do things that would discourage them from wanting to be board members, which is done?
Absolutely.
Then they say, oh, you don't have enough experience. Well, how do you get experience?
Exactly. Sometimes you just can't. I often sit in my car and I look at the seatbelt, which now is adjustable, right? But many years ago, both me and you know that it was just one set length for it to go across. And it was set for a U.S. male. And so if I got in a car accident, and still yet even today, let's be honest about that, the airbag, the seatbelt, and the position of the seat is structured for a man. I'm only 5'4". Okay, I'm short. That is going to break me or snap my neck in half. 100%. Like, that is the risk that I run, because it was never tested previous until the last maybe 10 years on women or people that are shorter. And there's, what is it? You're a very tall individual. What is it?
6'5". Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I don't know why I didn't go to the NBA, but that's for another conversation. Um,
Mhm.
but then there's people like me, but we both drive the same car. But the risk profile for you is also outside of the norm, and the risk profile for me is outside of the norm. But a car that I'm going to be driving should be able to modify to give us equal risk profiles, don't you think?
I agree.
Just a very simple thing that if we had somebody who was 6'5" on the board at a car company, or somebody who looks like me, shorter, on the car company, we'd be like, that's great, but I can't actually reach the button to change the music without taking my eyes off the road. Do you think that's dangerous? Probably.
Probably. Particularly if you're a car manufacturer, you have to factor into the concept of women drivers and women being the ones to pick up the kids and women doing a lot of shopping and all the things that women do in this country, even in other countries. I mean, I don't want to relegate them to this task, but you have to look at the population. Okay, if 50% of our population is women, then I should be designing cars that cater to that population. And if the average height is 5'4", let's say, maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
It
But
might be a little
either
bit
way,
taller, but
you should be designing cars with women in mind. That's the issue.
I mean, you think about everything as simple as from the toilet seat to, sinks to handicap, disability, and
Hmm.
inclusion access, because not everybody's like us. I know a lot of
That's
people
the
like using a
definition
remote
of
control,
inclusion. Yes.
right? We like using a remote control for our TV, right?
Hmm.
That was originally designed for somebody with disabilities who couldn't get up and change the channel on the
Hmm.
television. So things that we enjoy as being just a privilege is something that was a necessity for somebody that needed to be a part of the inclusion part of that I in DE&I. So a lot of innovation comes from that space. I watch my TV on captions because I don't know what it is about the new sound quality of movies these days,
Hmm.
but I can't understand what the heck they're saying. So I have to I have to read it at the same time.
That's funny.
So, but that's from somebody who's hearing impaired, right? And so almost
Hmm.
everything comes with closed captions, and I'm grateful for that. All right, I know that I've
I
been
know my friend George Lucas invented THX.
yes, yes, and I am
Sound
so
quality.
grateful. I am so grateful to it.
Hmm.
I know I've taken up a lot of your time, but I have some more rapid fire questions for you, which includes
Let's
some
do
of the
it.
ones I kept it
All
before.
right.
What is a book that challenged your perspective on leadership?
The Alpha Masters.
Hmm, I haven't heard of this book.
And
Tell me a little bit about it.
it talks a little bit about the folks that created hedge funds and how when they failed, what we would do for people of color, if they fail, they go hide somewhere. But these white folks, when they failed, they would just go somewhere. They'd go to a friend and they'd say, "Hey, I failed. My business failed. So I'm going to take my kids out of private school and put them in public school. I'm going to switch out this Porsche for a Kia Optima, and I'm going to drive around in that for a while. And oh, by the way, I need to borrow your house and live in it for about a month, rent free. And if you let me do that, then I'll be back on my feet."
I think that
We would never do that.
the current president wrote an entire book on this called The Art of the Deal, where he talked about he was in debt, living in somebody else's house, borrowing OPM as we know it, other people's money, in order to get by. And even though he failed, he was still able to get investment for the next venture. Be like, yeah, I know the last one failed and everybody lost their money, but you should invest in me again. And having that confidence to say that, I can't even imagine doing that. In
Exactly.
my
Most
world,
people
failure's
can't.
not an option.
Right, exactly. Because if a woman fails, the profile, the thought around it is very different. Oh, she failed because she's a woman and blah,
I
blah,
set everybody
blah.
back 50 years.
Yes. And
Everybody.
I remember in 1990 reading The Art of the Deal. And but the Alpha Masters, I think, does a better job of illustrating exactly how and what these folks did that ended up being successful. And the fact that they were really struggling at one point and they didn't let that hold them back. They had the guts to go out and ask for the people that they borrowed money from before and lost that money. They asked for the exact same people that said, "Hey, I need to borrow more money to get my business up and running, and I won't fail this time. I know I failed the last time, but I won't fail this time." You have to have a lot of guts to do that. So that's why it's one of my favorite books, going back to what you said.
This may be politically incorrect, and I'm going to apologize in advance for this. But like I said, I speak to a lot of women and people of color, and one of the thing in my women's sessions that I talk about, especially financial freedom, is about the idea that you don't just have to save and invest more money; you have to actually make more money. Right? That's literally the largest gap, 30% on every dollar, and that's for white women to white males, right? And then it goes down based upon race. And I tell them, I said, you got to go in there and ask for a promotion, an increase, and everything else like that, like a mediocre white guy. The guy that
If they're
can't do
afraid
the
to
job
ask,
very
all they
well,
can
but
do
will
is
go
say
in
no.
and
That's
ask for
right.
that 20% raise.
Hmm.
You need to
That's
ask
right.
with it with the same confidence that they do.
Hmm. It
And
takes
it
a
sounds
lot of
right.
guts, but you have to do it.
You have to do it and you have to be confident about it and do not like start
Hmm.
negotiating down. Go in with all the confidence and have them speak their mouth first, right? As the
Hmm.
rebuttal. But I think that you're right. I think that that concept of having the confidence to just keep going, the tenacity, the perseverance, and of course, as you know, on this show, we're all about resilience to keep doing it because it doesn't matter how many no's you get. Honestly, don't care about that. You just need one yes to change everything.
I think that everything that you listed, the tenacity is something that Black women have. That's why people gravitate towards them. That's why they're the largest growing entrepreneur in this country, I think.
You know what they
But
said?
everybody wants what they have. That tenacity and that unwillingness to give up when it's uncorked and allowed to flourish, when it's not suppressed, when there's an active campaign against it. I think that that makes a difference to me.
My grandmother used to say, if you want something said, ask a man to say it. If you want something done, ask a woman to do it.
That's funny. I like that.
And I still believe it. I still
Mhm.
believe it at the end of the day because in society, men are usually listened to without question, right? But ultimately, if you know you want something done, definitely ask a black woman because you know that's going to be done without any questions. One of the financial myths you wish would disappear forever.
I think the idea that having money is evil, that for some reason, if you are successful at making money, that makes you an evil person. I wish that stigma would go away in our community.
Absolutely. Do you remember what Rockefeller said about having money?
No, I do not.
Rockefeller said that it's not a sin to go ahead and have money or make money or acquire money. It's only a
Mhm.
sin if you die with it.
There you go.
He was, of course, one of the founding fathers of philanthropy, in the United States, along with a couple of other people. And I think that money is ultimately a tool, right? It's not just about the money. It's just a measuring stick for some, but ultimately it's a tool for options and freedom. And that's what we all aspire to, isn't
Mhm.
it?
That's right.
Next question. What is your go-to mindset mantra when things get tough?
I watched the movie of my friend George Lucas, and I look at Star Wars, and I remember him telling me how difficult it was for him to make it. And he never gave up. He had this really crazy idea back in 1977. And I use that as my example of something that when he told me about that, I was like, I couldn't believe it because I was a huge Star Wars fan.
Mm.
And she said, I've got this idea back in 1977 about a tall guy dressed in all black and this big hairy guy that they call Wookiees, and that's based on my dog. And I was like, that does sound crazy.
It
And he
does sound
said, I
crazy
want
when
to
you
have
put it like in
people,
that framing.
yeah. And I want to have people dressed like Flash Gordon and have laser swords. And he said, when I pitched that to the studios, he said it looked at him like he was crazy. But his friends are the ones that encourage him to keep going. His friends, Martin Scorsese and his friends, friends for Coppola and others. They said, you know, George, you've got an idea and you're passionate about it, keep going.
And the world is better for it because of it, don't you think?
I think.
I
I
think
mean,
so.
as an example of just what to do when you're done not giving up. Don't give up on an idea no matter how crazy others tell you this. Because other people are going to say, that's crazy. What are you talking about? Why would you do that? I mean, when you think about what Star Wars is, then he had this really crazy idea. He said, I'm going to create special effects that have never been seen before, and it's going to cost millions of dollars. And she said people are looking at him like, what? Millions of dollars to do a Flash Gordon movie?
What is it? He of course created Lightworks, right?
Yes.
That did the
Industrial
special
Light and
effects
Magic. He used the opportunity to create a lot of things that we take for granted.
that never existed before then.
That's right. T. Jackson, Industrial Light and Magic. And he's also the first person that I think really cashed in on the toy craze because
Absolutely.
they ran out of toys in 1978 for Star Wars because
They didn't
there
think
was
it was going to
such a
do that well.
demand for them. They didn't think it was going to do that well. And he was like, you know, I think I don't want anything except the rights to all the toys. Now he makes like it's something like $1 billion in a week on Legos or something really ridiculous. It's
Do
something
you own
insane.
any? Do you own any?
I
Do you own
wish
any
I did.
Mattel things? I think a couple of them ended up in the fireplace for me.
I had the opportunity to buy in on Pixar back before Disney bought it, and I would have been a millionaire if I'd done it. But I didn't do it
I'm telling you
because
now.
somebody talked me out of it. I'm not friends with that person anymore.
I'm going to tell you right now, if you're passionate about it and that's your hobby and that's something that you love, regardless of whether it's going to
I
make you a
should have done it.
millionaire or not, support it. Put your money where your passion is, and
Hmm.
you'll never regret it, regardless of whether you make money or not. You'll never regret it because you're supporting something you actually believe in.
People say, "Do you have any regrets?" And I say, "No," but I do have a long list of what I wish I'd done. And I wish I'd bought Pixar when it was $12 a share before Disney bought it.
Um,
That's what I wish I'd done.
but you would have done it because you're passionate about movies. You're passionate about animation and effects and all that great stuff.
They made Toy Story and The Incredibles, and they exploded.
Exactly. But even whether you would have lost money, even if you would have lost money, would you have regretted that?
No,
Because you're passionate about it and you love it and you enjoy it. And that's what I always tell people. I'm like, if you're going to invest in something, put a little bit aside for things
follow
that you're
your passion.
passionate
That's
about
right. That's right.
because you'll never lose. You'll never
If
lose.
you have a closet full of sneakers, buy Nike stock or Adidas
Exactly.
or something.
Exactly. Exactly. I
And
mean,
don't worry
I
about
own
it going
Tiffany's
up or down or, you know.
after my
If you
namesake.
own Tiffany stock, then good,
I do.
because
I
those
do.
blue boxes and the t-shirts will be back.
They always do. They always come back. And even if I lost money on it, I'd still be proud to have something that's in my namesake. And
There you
that's
go.
really about the joy of it. You can't time the markets. Nobody's been successful at that, but you can go ahead and, be in the markets long enough to be successful. And that's really, I think, the key there for a lot of people. Following on the same thought process, if you
Sure.
weren't in finance, what would you be doing?
I'd be a journalist.
I
I'd
love
be
that.
doing more writing. I'd be writing stories about what's happening in the society today.
Well, on that one, I'm going to press you a little bit since
All right, go
today I
ahead.
guess I get to pretend I'm a journalist.
Go
Why
ahead.
aren't you writing your book? I'm
Good
waiting for it.
question. I have no idea. I don't think the story is that interesting or unique. That's the reason.
I've heard your story and I want to let you know I'd read the book.
I appreciate that.
And remember,
I
just
need
like
to
I
stick
said,
something spicy in there.
I
It
like
gets
it.
people to want to read it because if they just read cover to cover about some black guy working on Wall Street and when he was a banker he did this and when he was working for a pension plan he did that, that's boring. Who wants to read that?
You got to put the personal part in it. Come on.
I mean, if I put personal stuff like how my parents conceived me and, stuff that I did, and that's interesting. My college years,
The
that
lessons
would be interesting.
learned.
Yes,
I always ask people, I'm like, how did you fail today? And what did you learn? It's way more exciting than what you did right. I don't care. That's boring. But things where you failed, where you learned lessons, the struggle, the joys, the sweet successes after hard earned sweat and tears. That's absolutely it. And I think you have a book. I want to read it. I want you to get on that. Last question is legacy in one word. What does that mean to you?
it means when people think about you after you're gone.
Okay.
So if I buy a house and they say, well, I live in this house and the legacy of that is this guy named Blair Smith bought the house first, and now I live here, and or you come up with an idea. When I think of a legacy, I think of Christ and Saladin and a few others.
I love that. I love that.
Not that I'm comparing myself to them, but
You should. You
not at
should.
all. Not at all.
Remember? Remember? We're going bold. We're going big. I want you to dream so crazy that other people call you crazy because those are the only dreams that are worth
They already do.
it. That's what I like to hear. Well, Blair, I want to let you know that this conversation has been nothing less than short of
Transformative?
transformative. Thank you.
No?
We often talk about finance in the terms of
Leave that
numbers.
in.
We'll leave that one there. We'll edit it later.
Yeah.
But today, you've reminded us that behind every dollar and every policy and every barrier,
Mhm.
there are real people, real struggles, and
Mhm.
real opportunities for change. Your work is a testament to the fact that economic justice isn't just a dream, but it's really a fight, and one that's worth showing up for. Blair, this conversation has been nothing short of transformative. We often talk about finance in terms of numbers, but today you reminded us that behind every dollar, behind every policy, and every struggle, there are real people, real barriers, and real opportunities for change. Your work is really a testament to the fact that economic justice isn't just a dream, it's a fight, and it's one that's worth showing up for. Thank you for lending your voice, your expertise, and your passion to this conversation. Understanding that money isn't just about wealth accumulation, it's about using that knowledge as a tool to navigate, challenge, and reshape the financial system. For everyone listening, if this conversation challenged you, inspired you, and made you think differently about wealth, power, history, let's keep the dialogue going. Share this episode, drop a comment, and most importantly, take action. The systems around us aren't built in stone. They are built by people like us. And that means we have the power to rebuild them. As always, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next deep dive into resilience, equity, and rewriting the rules of success. Until that time, stay informed, stay empowered, and stay resilient. I'll see you there.
So I have a long list of people that I need to thank for their mentorship, and that includes Robert Smith, Ray McGuire, Melody Hobson, and her husband, George Lucas, and Van Jones, and a few others. So I just wanted to make sure I had the opportunity to thank them. And my staff at Milken and Mr. Milken for giving me the opportunity to create a legacy, as we call it.
Absolutely. And for myself, I want to thank God
Okay?
and every
And I
other
want to thank
ancestor that
God
came
too.
before me.
And I want to thank you and I want to thank me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And
Of course.
I think this is really going to be a stepping stone for change. Even if it's just for one person, it's absolutely worth it. And for you, I want that book.